You are listening to episode number 50 of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. Can you believe it? Episode 50. I personally cannot believe that we're rapidly approaching the 1-year anniversary of the podcast and that right this very second, I'm recording our 50th episode. This episode is extra special because I asked you to ask me anything and to send in your questions for this episode. And I'm going to answer every single one that was submitted. So from labs to working in the PLC and curriculum writing to my favorite foods, we are going to cover it all. So whether you submitted a question or not, hopefully you will find the answer shared in this episode helpful. Are you ready to hear your answers to all your burning questions? Let's get to it. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I'm passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You're in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, first and foremost, you know I have to do a giveaway in honor of the 50th episode. And so I'm going to give away a $100 gift card to the It's Not Rocket Science resource shop. And all you need to do to enter is leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And then screenshot your review and DM it to me on Instagram at It's Not Rocket Science on Instagram so that I can see your entry and record it. And then on December 15th, I will select one winner randomly to receive the virtual gift card and I'll send it to you. And I also wanted to make sure before we got into your questions that you were aware that as this airs, it is Cyber Monday, which means it is the annual TPT site-wide sale for Cyber Monday and Tuesday. This is the most predictable sale that TPT does all year long. They typically do one per quarter, and this one in quarter 4 is always Cyber Monday and Tuesday. So this is your last chance to save up to 25% on It's Not Rocket Science resources. And you can do that in my resource shop or in my TPT store. And I will link both in the show notes so you can access those today and tomorrow. Okay. There were so many great questions, so let's just dive right into them. So first came from Amina, and she asked, are you currently teaching? And so I've tried to be very transparent about this in my social media and in the emails I write, but I am currently not in the classroom. I have not been in the classroom full time since we adopted our oldest, and he's 4 years old. So my maternity leave for him kind of went into the summer, and then when August rolled around, he was just a few months old, and I just wasn't ready to go back. And so by the next August, our daughter was born, our second. So I got pregnant when our first was about 8 months old. And so then she was born. So I knew I wanted to be home with her that first year. And just adjusting to 2 kids within 17 months was a lot. And then the following August was August 2020. So that was mid-pandemic. And I was like, hard pass. And I really needed the time that I was working, which is when my kids were sleeping. I needed that to add in virtual teaching tips to all my It's Not Rocket Science units and add in accommodations. And I did a big revamp of the biology curriculum, which was my first It's Not Rocket Science curriculum that I published. So I did a big revamp of that in August 2020, that whole fall. And so I was working on that and not teaching. And then by August 2021, the next school year, I was pregnant with our third, who just was born in March of 2022. So now I have 3 kids and they're all daycare age, which it just does not make any financial sense for me to go back. The cost of daycare for my 3 children full time is more than my teaching salary was when I was last in the classroom. So it just doesn't make sense financially. But long term, would I go back and teach? I would love to. I really miss students and I just miss teaching students. But I also really love writing curriculum and creating resources. And if I'm going to be perfectly transparent with y'all, there's no way I could imagine doing both at the same time. You know, I did both for a while, but I didn't have kids at that time. So to imagine teaching and keeping up with It's Not Rocket Science and recording, Secondary Science Simplified podcast episodes and managing my 3 children and taking care of them, it would just be way too much. So I know that if one day I go back into the classroom, that's going to kind of be where I press the pause button on doing anything for It's Not Rocket Science or Secondary Science Simplified. And so I'm just trying to weigh that out. And maybe there'll be like a part-time position that could open up one day that would help me balance all of it and doing both. But who knows? I'm just taking it year by year. And so as of now, I don't have plans to go back because I'm just really loving writing curriculum and doing these podcast episodes for you. So that's where we're at now. Okay, next question was from Sam. She asked, if you could create your own class, what would it be over? And so I kind of have two thoughts on this, which are not even science related at all. So I know this is the Secondary Science Simplified podcast, but I would actually love to teach either a business class to high schoolers or like a life skills class. Okay, so the business one is pretty crazy because I have personally never taken a business class in my life. So even just the fact that I like run It's Not Rocket Science and this has become a business and like it's my job is just hysterical to me because I have known nothing and I've learned everything as I've gone. But I think I've just learned so much since I started It's Not Rocket Science. Golly, I guess it's been 6 or 7 years now ago that I started. I've just learned a lot. And I would love to teach a class to students about, starting your own business and what that looks like. And starting your one man or one woman show, and what that looks like with marketing and social media and just all the things, balancing the numbers, like being your own bookkeeper and deciding how much to like spend on investing back in your business. I just think it would be really, really fun to do that. But also I would really enjoy like a life skills course. Honestly, like home ec, but the 2022 version of home ec. I just think there are so many things that I just didn't know. And my parents were very involved and I feel like they did a great job. But, I'm just thinking of like finances. My husband and he was really into Dave Ramsey. So we, did all the Dave Ramsey courses and things like that when we were first married and we were on such a strict budget and like learning how to not live in debt and things like that. And I feel like I learned so much about that I didn't know. Also just thinking of, life management almost. Like right now, I am responsible for 3 other humans that are not me. And it's a lot to balance and manage the home and like meal prep and figure out how do you batch things. And I don't know. I just think there's a lot that I've learned in life and I'm still young, I would say. I feel like I'm young. So like, I feel like I know I still have so much to learn. And so I just feel like it would be a really fun class and you could bring in so many guests to come and speak to your students. I just would really enjoy to teach like a life skills class. So I think that would be really fun too. Okay, next question was from Karen. And she asked, if you were not in education or curriculum writing, what would you be doing? And I thought about this for a long time. And I asked some of my friends what they thought. And I asked my husband. And when it really came down to it, y'all, I would love to work for the home edit and I would love to be hired to go into people's houses and organize their houses for them. Like give me a budget for containers and things like that. And then let me just come into your pantry and organize it or come into your closet. I genuinely love organizing and I love making use of the space that you have and using it the best way you possibly can, maximizing what you do have and coming up with solutions. Like we don't have a coat closet right now and we don't have a linen closet. So I've had to come up with creative solutions for like, where do our coats go? Where do we keep linens if we don't have spaces for that? And I've really enjoyed it. So I would love to do that, to like come into someone's house, strategize, and then execute an organization plan that they can sustain. I would really enjoy. I feel like that sounds so random, but I genuinely think that's what I would do. Okay, another question from Sam. She asked my favorite and my least favorite part of writing curriculum. And this is a funny question because when she first asked, I was like, okay, I know my least, I know my most, like done. And then as I've been writing the chemistry curriculum that I'm working on right now, I keep thinking of like, oh, I don't like this part. I don't really like this part either. And then, oh, but I love this. And so my list kept growing. So I have several least favorites and several most favorites. Okay, so least favorite. I don't love standards research and deciphering standards. Like it's not a lot of fun, but it's not my least favorite. I will say it's a very methodical process. I have this giant spreadsheet where I have every state and I link their standards and then I read them. And then I have like this 47-page document of notes I've taken on them and where I've like read them. And because I've done this now 4 times for biology, anatomy, physical science, and now chemistry, I feel like I'm getting really good at translating standards language to language that is actually practical and makes sense. So it's not very much fun, but it's a very straightforward process. Like it's just walking through steps A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You just walk through each day and you just do the same thing over and over. So I don't love that, but it's not my least favorite. I would say the two things I really, really dislike doing. One is I hate finding images for commercial use. So because I sell my resources, any image that I use, I have to own it. Like it has to be an image that I've taken or a graphic that I've designed, or I have to purchase the rights to use it commercially. And so I am not very artistic at all. So I wish I was like a graphic design person. I could make my own graphics. I will say over time, I've gotten better at taking pictures of things and then like removing the background and kind of like making use of that to use my own photos. But I think the most annoying thing is like I can spend an hour looking for a picture of a crucible and a cover to explain that in a lab equipment resource, or I can just like buy a crucible and a cover on Amazon, take a picture of it, edit out the background, like insert, like, so that's a very annoying part of the process because it just feels like it's a lot of time. And sometimes I'll find like a graphic or image and I'll be really excited and then I'll download it and there'll be errors in it, like scientific errors or typos in it. And so that's just frustrating too. So that's kind of like a not fun part of the process. Another thing I really don't love is writing tests. The actual test writing is not terrible to me, but the thing with the tests, I was telling my husband, is like I spent 4 days on the Unit 1 tests for the first unit in this chemistry curriculum. And I've never finished writing a test and been like, wow, this is amazing. Everyone's going to love this test. Like it's just a test. Like you can't get that fired up about a test. Whereas there's one learning activity, instructional resource, if you will, that's in the first unit of the chemistry curriculum that I spent a week on. And I love how it turned out. Like every time I just open it and look at it, I'm like, I love this. I'm so excited about this. I can't wait to hear how teachers use this and what their students think. And you just get, it was worth 5 days of time. And I've never finished writing a test and been like, I'm so glad I just spent 4 to 5 days of my work time writing this test, but it's obviously still very important and it's worth doing because I know most people don't like writing tests. And I got to take, luckily, some courses in my master's program where I learned how to write tests well. So even though I don't like love it, I know how to do it. And then the only other thing I would say too that is not my favorite is just like proofreading and editing and then just like reviewing resources for alignment, which I do 100 times in a unit. And I think the reason I don't like it is because I like to check things off my list and be done with it. And I feel like I'm just never done proofreading. I'm never done editing. I can always read something another time. And then I'm never done reviewing for alignment. Like every time I make something new, a new activity, a new practice handout, every time I add another question to a test, I go back and I like go through my first page, which is my outline of my unit. And then I go through my notes, I go through my instructional resources, and I make sure it's covered in all of these places so it all aligns. And it's just one of those things that it's kind of this like overarching weight while I'm writing a unit of like, I constantly have to be doing this. And it's not until the unit is completely done that I feel like I can check it off. And then even still, I will get people down the road. Like I have someone using the physical science curriculum right now. I don't know if she's listening to this. I'm so grateful for her. She emails me every time she finds a typo, but I'm like so disturbed because I use that physical science curriculum with my own students for years and missed some of these typos. And then there's so many other teachers that have used this curriculum over the last few years that never noticed or just never told me. And I think about how much time I spent editing. And now I even pay other people to be other sets of eyes on my resources for editing. And still when stuff slips through, you're just like, oh man. So I don't love that. But let's not be negative because overall, I love writing curriculum. And so here are some of my favorite parts of it. One, I love brainstorming ideas for really tricky concepts. Like I love just sitting on an idea saying, okay, sig figs. Like sig figs are not fun. I understand the purpose of them, like when you're making calculations in lab and how you need to know how to round and all of that. I get it. But like, how are we going to make this either make easier to understand, less confusing, more engaging, or just more memorable for students? Those are all things I'm processing through as I'm thinking through topics that are either boring or tricky. And then I sit on it for a while. And then like every once in a while, I'll be like, boom. And the idea will hit of what I want to do. And then I'm like off like a racehorse. Like I'm like, I know exactly what I want to do this. So for example, with chemistry, since that's what I'm writing right now, I knew I wanted a lab in the first unit that would allow us to review the experimental design process. Students could design it from scratch. So it could be like an inquiry investigation. and I wanted to, practice doing some basic calculations in lab, creating graphs, all of that. I didn't want to have to directly lecture or reteach this kind of stuff because I feel like chemistry students should have had that in many years of science prior to chemistry. But then I also know they really need that review. So I wanted to do it all within the scope of a lab. And because of that, I knew I needed to do a lab that wasn't very chemistry content heavy, because I didn't want them to be overwhelmed by the chemistry to the point where they couldn't focus on reviewing what an independent variable was or why we needed a control group. So then I was like, but it needs to be a topic that they're actually going to be bought into. And so I'm really excited with what I came up with. And I literally skipped it and I moved on. And then one day in the shower, I thought of what I wanted to do. And then I sat down and I executed it. And it was just so fun. When you get that creative spark and you have a great idea, it's just really fun. So I really like brainstorming and working through how to teach a boring topic and or a tricky topic. I also do really enjoy the ebbs and flows that occur as you write a unit. I feel like the first part of the creation process is super creative and I'm really using the creative parts of my brain to execute it. And then the second half is really a lot more technical. I'm writing teacher notes. I'm recording lecture videos. I'm making answer keys. I'm writing unit plans. There's so much that goes into it. It's just more technical and it's more methodical, but it's kind of nice. It almost gives the creative part of my brain time to rest and recharge before then I start that again with the next unit. So I really, really enjoyed the ebbs and flows. I really like that every day of my job writing curriculum looks really different. Okay. Next was from Tanika, and she asked 2 questions. First was advice for a first-year teacher. And I have a blog post on this, which I'm going to link in the show notes. So I won't go in insane detail on this. But the 5 things I tell first-year teachers are, first, you need to leave work at work. You need to start a habit from the very beginning of setting your working hours and sticking to them, and then not working at home outside of those hours. I think it's better to stay at school late and get what you need to done than to bring something home to finish, because it just starts creating this gray area between work and home, and you stop protecting your home life, and then it just gets harder and harder to kind of regroup on that boundary. So really setting boundaries early, I think, is really important, because mentally you need to see this as a job and not your life. And I've said it so many times, but it's so easy as teachers for it to infiltrate into our life because we're working with humans that we really care about and we want to impact. And I feel like teachers in general tend to be altruistic in nature. And a lot of teachers are Enneagram 2s. If you're an Enneagram 2, they're Enneagram 1 and 2s is the most common for teachers. And so I just find boundaries can be hard. And so I really want to encourage you to have boundaries. I also want to encourage you to have systems. Have systems that you've decided on and be really clear on teaching those systems and those routines to your students, and then consistently reinforcing them over and over and over again. Hold the line there too. Hold those boundaries with your students, because that will really help you down the road too. I also like to tell first-year teachers that parents are an asset and not a burden. So don't neglect parents. Partner with them, be proactive with them, start building a relationship with them as well as a student as early as possible, especially if you're in a private school where parents are going to be a lot more involved in their children's educations because they're paying for it. They tend to be more involved, at least from my experience. Another thing I'll say is use your sick days. I know there's an argument, of course, for saving your sick days for a future maternity leave and stockpiling them. So don't necessarily blow through them for no reason. But if you don't feel well, use a sick day. If you need a mental break, use a sick day. If you feel so behind on grading, use the sick day to get caught up so you're in a good place mentally and not feeling overwhelmed by work. I hoarded them my first year teaching, and then my second year teaching, I realized we were going to have to move for my husband's job and I was going to be in a different district and my days weren't going to transfer. So I just started using them, and I just enjoyed that second year so much more. And I never even used up all the days, but I just enjoyed it a lot more because I was taking time off when I needed it. And then the last thing I'll say for first year teachers is ask for help. I think we want to look like we have it all together. We want to know what we're doing, or look like too that we know what we're doing and feel like we know what we're doing. But at the end of the day, we just don't. And there's so much with teaching that you're going to learn through trial and error, and take advantage of other people and what they've learned through trial and error, and ask questions, ask for help, ask your admin for support, ask your department chair, reach out and teacher Facebook groups for help. I think don't be afraid of humbling yourself and asking for help, because I think it makes a really big difference. And then the last thing I'll really say, I know I said last thing, but I have an entire virtual professional development course that I wrote with first year teachers in mind. And it ended up becoming something that, veteran teachers started taking who wanted to kind of reset how they were doing their jobs. But I originally wrote it for first year teachers, and it's the Secondary Science Simplified professional development course. And I tend to open it up in June. And then we are together as kind of like a cohort for the summer, going through the content together. And you watch it and do it at your own pace. It's, pre-recorded videos. You get a lot of support documents and things like that with it. But then there's also a Facebook group that I'm in for the 8 weeks of the course where you can ask questions, and I do some live teaching and things like that. But it's really this podcast in a more one-on-one setting and a more hands-on setting. And so if that's something you'd be interested in, I'll link the waitlist. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure if I'm going to open it up this summer or not yet, just because I'm going to be at that time come June, I'm going to be really trying to finish the curriculum for chemistry by August. And so I'm just not sure if I'm going to run the course or not. But if there's enough interest, I will. So if you have interest in the course, check out the waitlist link that's in the show notes. It's not rocketscienceclassroom.com/waitlist, but check out that link and put your name in there and your email. And then that way I can just have a general number tabulating who's interested. And I don't badger anyone who's on the wait list. The people on the wait list just get an early access email that no one else gets. It's not like I'm emailing them extra compared to other people on my email list. So if you want to be getting early access information about the course, then that would be a great place to join. Tanika's other question was, she's about to be a student teacher in January. And as a student teacher, she asked, how do you handle or channel the fear of not being a great teacher? And so first, I just want to encourage anyone who's a student teacher, or really anyone listening, what does it mean to you to be a great teacher? How would you define a great teacher? I know for me, when I think back on teachers from my own life that I thought were great, it was teachers that loved me, and I felt like they loved us, me and my classmates, but also that loved their content. I think about Miss Waspy, my math teacher. I had her for 2 different math classes, and then I was her teacher's aide 1 year too. She just loved her math content. And math can be a more dry content area. Sorry if you're listening and you're a math teacher and you found this podcast, but she just loved it, and it made me love it, especially when I was in her AP Stats class. So I just think for me, all it took for me to think my teachers were great was that they loved us and they loved their content. And if you haven't listened already, I interviewed my own chemistry teacher back over the summer, and I will link that episode in the show notes. But I didn't even realize that he was in his first few years teaching when I had him as a student. And I thought he was an amazing teacher. And he was like, I had no idea what I was doing. And so that's just such an encouragement to me too. You're doing so much better than you think. And your students really don't realize maybe how unprepared or nervous you feel. And then the other thing I would say just for student teaching is take a deep breath and just go ahead and know right now that you're going to make a lot of mistakes and you're going to be bad at a lot of things, and that's okay. You will learn so much from your mistakes. I remember when I was student teaching, I had 2 sections of meteorology. It was a senior elective science. And I didn't know anything about meteorology. I didn't have any classes in college about that. I was just studying what I had to study to teach the next day. And they would ask me questions and I would have no idea how to answer their questions. And so I just want to encourage, and I will also say, since they were seniors in high school and I was a senior in college, we were only 4 years apart. So we felt close in age. And so I just want to encourage you, it's okay to not be great. And it's okay to admit that you only know what you know. And be if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, be okay, let's Google it. Let's figure this out together. I had to do that a lot when I was teaching AP Bio a couple of years later. And I would also say to really lean on your mentor teacher and soak up all of the support you can. My mentor teacher wasn't the greatest. He was on his way out. He was in this state program where you're technically at retirement age, but you commit to work 5 more additional years. And he had 2 more years left of his 5-year payout situation. So he straight up gave me a file folder of projector slides and went to the faculty room. and was like out. Like I didn't see him. And he was such a kind person, but he just wasn't very hands-on. But I was able, like, you're hopefully going to be in some sort of cohort where you have other student teachers that you're able to talk to. And that was so helpful to have a professor and have that cohort and to ask them questions and what they were doing with, their student teachers that were a little bit more helpful and hands-on. So just ask questions, soak up all the support you can. And again, if you're worried about being bad, that just means you won't be, because you're already care enough to be concerned about if you're going to be bad. So you're already going to be better than you think just because you're worried about being bad. And so I just want to encourage you that, and just take it one day at a time. Like, don't stress. You're a student teacher. This is a learning process. Like, you should not do it perfectly, and that's totally okay. All right. Next question came from Mrs. Cannell, and she said, can you give me any advice on how you ran student council? So my best advice for student council is find a meeting time that really works well for you. For me, we did it during lunch because I cannot do the students first thing in the morning. I need to get into my room and like be in my room by myself, my classroom, and prep in the morning. That's just me personally. And then I didn't want to impact after school tutoring because I really like to hold and protect that time for my students. So we did meetings during lunch. And I know that can be tricky if you have multiple lunches, but I think it could be worth having, multiple meetings during lunch if you have to. I think if you can find a time during the day, that's really, really, really helpful. Another thing I'll say too is the first year I talked to the previous student council advisor a lot to get as much advice as I could, especially on the timing of things. He had been the advisor for like 10 years. So he didn't really have any notes or anything to give me. And so a lot of it was just in his head. So I made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of deadlines the first year of stuff I just didn't realize I was supposed to do. But I made a reference document during that first year of what needed to be done each month. Like, so in August, we as student council were responsible for designing t-shirts for the retreat that we did at our school, and then in September, we needed to just do XYZ to plan for Spirit Week, which was an entire week in October for homecoming. And then come November, we need to do this. In April, we need to do elections. So I had this document, and that timeline was really helpful. And it was such a gift when I left the classroom to hand that timeline to the next student council advisor. So I definitely recommend having something like that. I also recommend putting as much as possible on the students. This is student council and you are the advisor. You are supposed to advise them. You are not supposed to run this. You are not supposed to do this. At the end of the day, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, I know it reflects on you, but it really reflects on them. And so I feel like really put this on the students. Like if they got elected as student, council president, they're putting this on their resume. They need to do a lot of work for that. That's a big title to put on your resume. So they need to show up and show out for it and really do it and take the reins on that. And then the last thing I'll say on this is for big stuff like Spirit Week, you need to recruit other teachers to help you. And I mean, it's as simple as like, I'm not sporty. I'm not sporty spice at all. I can't run the dodgeball tournament between faculty and students. I can't do it. But I can ask the gym teacher, like, can you just be in charge of everything related to the dodgeball tournament? Like, can you just take that off the plate? And here's someone on student council. Here's a student that's going to be your like go-to person as a student. And you're going to be the go-to faculty person on this. And we just kind of divvy the tasks up that way because Spirit Week is a bear. And so I just really recommend bringing in other teachers in small ways for that and using their giftings and even standing up at a faculty meeting and saying like, I need everyone to be in charge of like one thing and help me with one thing. You're not going to be alone on this. Like I'll help. We have the students to help, of course. And then pick something that like works with your giftings and like what you want to do. So having the theater teacher run all the tech and audio for any of the assemblies. So I didn't have to worry about the tech stuff, that kind of thing. So I really recommend recruiting others for that. Okay. The next question came from Tyler. And he gave me a lot of context, which I'll kind of summarize for you. But I really wanted to share this question because I'm sure this is something a lot of us have experienced. But he asked, how do you deal with students taking advantage of lab days? So he teaches 8th grade science. He likes to do, a lab a week if he can. He said on non-lab days, they have a lot of day-to-day routine, a lot of structure. But then of course, when it's lab day, his students kind of go crazy. It's like they forget like how to behave in class because they're so excited. And admin just keeps saying, it's because he's a first year teacher. They're kind of putting the blame on him, but he feels like he doesn't know what he could possibly do better to kind of change this. He says he's laid out the consequences. He's followed through with consequences. He's done office referrals and, contacted parents. He's removed lab privileges. He's done alternative assignments. And they're still, his example was literally they did a chicken wing dissection and a student slapped another student with a chicken wing, which makes me laugh, but I would also want to cry if that was happening in my classroom. So I get it. And he's just feeling burnt out. He's like, I don't want to do labs because these kids are acting like a fool. And it's not fun for me to put all this time prepping in a lab when they're just going to act crazy and it's going to be exhausting and we can't do it. So here's my best advice for Tyler and anyone else in a similar situation. First thing I will say is day before lab, I love just blocking out 10 to 15 minutes of time of going over the lab and what we're going to do and being really, really clear about those expectations again. Like he said he's done that and I believe him, but just making sure like you have laid out, this is what we're doing tomorrow. I expect you when you walk in this room, like you don't bring your backpack, you immediately walk in, you sit down. These are the consequences, XYZ, if you do not do these things. And then you have to be consistent in those. I would make your alternative assignment extremely boring so that they don't want to do it. And I would send them to another teacher's classroom to do it. So if a kid slaps another kid with a chicken wing, there's no warning. Like you're out, you're in the next door classroom and you're doing this assignment. Like wash your hands, take this essay assignment, go write it in the next room. And you're also going to be out for the next lab too. Like you're out for this lab and the next one. I think that is a further enough punishment that'll hopefully make them take it seriously. Also, if you haven't already, I really recommend board points as like a whole classroom management strategy. I have a blog post on this. I'll link in the show notes, but that really helps if you can't like isolate one student's behavior to punish and it's kind of like a whole class thing. I would utilize board points and I would cut off the lab for the entire class. I think if behavior continues to be this way, I would say, hey, the punishment is no labs the rest of this unit. And I know that's terrible and that's not the way to teach students. But at the end of the day, it becomes a safety hazard if you can't trust students to behave appropriately and responsibly in lab. And at least I found with my own students and my own children, if I present a very harsh consequence like this, and then they do said behavior that warrants the consequence, when I follow through on something big like this, they really take notice. Like I have told my student, my own children this week, if you hit your brother with that again, it's going in the trash can. Like we're done. We're not going to love our toys more than we love our brother. Like I'm throwing away that toy and I will take it and I will throw it in the trash in front of them. And then I will get it out of the trash and I'll go donate it to someone who will play with it. But I'm just saying they will remember, like they will not hit each other again with that because they know. And so I think putting a really harsh punishment in place is good. Another thing I'd recommend is shadowing other teachers in your school during their lab days. Since you are a first year teacher, I think the more I shadowed other teachers, the more I was able to learn. I really recommend it. I know it's so hard to sacrifice a planning period to shadow another teacher, but just seeing how other teachers handle lab days, I just think is really, really helpful. I learned a lot doing that. It was actually required in kind of like our first year teacher training guidelines at the school I taught in to do that. That was really helpful. I would also reach out to other teachers who teach these same students, who teach this 8th grade science class like you do, like their English teacher, their history, etc., and just see what's been effective for them. They're obviously not going to be doing as many things out of their seats and hands-on as you are, but I still think that can be really, really helpful to see what they're doing. And then the last thing I'll say about this is I just really want to encourage you that 8th grade is hard. And it's especially hard if you're the first one really, really challenging them. When I moved to a private school, I'd only ever taught high school and I was hired to teach high school science. But then when I got there, I was voluntold that I was going to be teaching a couple sections of 8th grade science. And I don't have any training in middle school. And, I don't know how to teach 8th graders. So I just treated them like high schoolers. And, that's all I knew how to do. But I was like, I'm going to prepare them for high school. And it was rough. It was the first time a lot of these students had been challenged. It was the first time they had ever had a test that wasn't just the study guide that they'd been given before with all the answers. They'd been so used to a study guide with fill in the blank answers that then the test was just the fill in the blanks that were blank. And they were actually being tested on their content knowledge and their skills for the first time. And it was rough. Like students were making their first C's and D's and F's that they've ever made before in my class because I was challenging them. And it was a lot of growing pains. Like at first my admin was like, what are you doing? And parents were like, you're ruining my kids' lives. And the kids were like, this is so hard. But the kids also saw that I was really active in teaching them. And like we were doing a lot of fun hands-on things in class. And it was just a hard class. And over time, admin really came over on my side. And when admin came over and started supporting me, parents started supporting me. And then the next year when I had all those kids for high school, 9th grade biology, they crushed it. And the parents were like, they were doing so well in science and they were struggling in some of their other content areas that they'd never been challenged in before. And they really saw, and it was a long-term game. So I encourage you to just play the long-term game, give yourself some grace. If you need to stop doing labs for a time because it's draining you too much and burning you too out, like you stop doing labs. That's on your students just for a period of time. And then try to bring them back in again. And hopefully they'll respect that a little bit more when they've had time where they don't get to do those. And I just want to encourage you, Tyler, you're doing a great job because you're really, really trying and you're doing all the right things. And I would just say too, if after this year, if you don't feel like your admin are really supporting you, then that's like an admin issue. And I would maybe consider looking into other jobs, which I think we're going to end up doing an entire month about working with admin that are difficult and like what that looks like and what you should consider with changing jobs. I'm thinking about doing that this spring, kind of around April when contracts come out. So stay tuned for more on working with admin that may not be the most supportive. But I think having supportive admin is like one of the most important factors in enjoying your job. So I really encourage you to be in a situation where you're out of school with admin that really support you. So I would consider that too. Okay, I hope that helps. Okay, Shar asked, a couple lab questions are coming next. First one is from Shar. She said, how do you break up a lab if it has a specific order so that students are not all clumped up? So if you have enough resources, I would have multiple copies of, your stations or your lab or your materials and spread out students as much as possible if you have a lot of students. And that's only going to work though if you have enough resources. If you don't have enough resources, like you're limited on your resources, I would split your students in half. And half of your students collect data for the lab on one day, and then the other half do it the next day. Then you can cut your class in half, essentially. Like that's the best way to put it. Instead of having 30 students doing a lab, you only have 15 at a time, and you can help those students a lot more. And then have the half of the class that's not doing the lab, give them some sort of like reinforcing practice to work on at their desks independently that they can do by themselves without needing you at all. And then you switch and you flip flop it, and then you continue. And it makes the labs take twice as much time, but it's really the best way I found to handle it if you have a big class and not a lot of space and not a lot of resources, but you want to still do these really fun labs. You got to break it up and do it that way and chunk it up that way. It's really helpful. Oop, I can hear one of my kids crying downstairs. I don't know if you can hear that. Hopefully not. Okay, next question. This is from Katie. She asked, how do you determine which labs to include in a unit and which ones to leave out? When do you do them? Do you do them at the beginning, before notes, or after notes? So when I would just anytime I start teaching a new subject, a subject that's new to me, I shoot to just include one lab per unit. I mean, yes, I would love to do one every week, but just when you're tackling something new, there's so much that goes into it with like coming up with your lesson plans, studying the content, just adjusting to a class you've never taught before. So I just try to minimize the labs, one per unit, and I try to do that one lab really, really well. Then if I love the lab, we keep it for the next year. If I just like it, I figure out how could we tweak it to make it a lab that I love. And then if I don't like it, we dump it. Because I only want to expend energy and resources doing labs that I love and students are really learning and getting a lot out of. And I would just say start small. Start small with this one lab per unit and then add in more labs and activities each year that you teach a subject area, and you can get more and more creative with it. Like my biology curriculum has gotten more creative over time as I've gotten so comfortable teaching the content, and I've had more bandwidth to experiment and try new things and bring in new activities. So I would really encourage you start small with one and then go from there. Now, to decide when to do it in a unit, I think that depends on the lab. Often the first time that I'm going to do a lab, I'm going to do it more traditionally where we've done some sort of lecture or direct instruction, and then we'll do the lab afterward as reinforcement. And then I just kind of see how the lab goes. And if it feels like something that we could work the other way around and do first. I really do love to do labs first and then get students exploring content and engaging with it prior to having it all explained to them. But not every lab really suits itself to do that way. So I would try it traditionally first and then kind of see, I wonder if we could try it a different way this time, and really consider the background knowledge they're going to need to do the lab. Like, can they do this lab safely with no prior knowledge? Maybe. And if so, go ahead and try to do it first before you lecture. A lot of this is trial and error too. A lot of it. I just want to encourage you with that. Okay. The next few questions come from a variety of people, and they're all about writing curriculum like I do and how to do it for yourself. And so there were so many questions on this. I just decided I'm going to do a month-long series of podcast episodes on this because we're already getting along in this episode and I'm not going to be able to do all these questions justice. So coming in July, we're going to do a month-long series on this. And I'm doing July because one, I know a lot of you are still in school in June, or two, you're just recovering from the previous school year in June. And I want to wait till July because then I'm hoping you're a little bit more rested and you might be ready to like listen to the podcast episode and then really apply what we're doing. And we're going to break it down, how I write a curriculum, into chunks. And then hopefully by then too, in July, you'll know what you're teaching next year. And you can take one of those new preps that you have and you can apply the podcast episode series to your preps. So that's going to be coming. So in the meantime, though, until then, as you're teaching each unit you're teaching now, please take an hour and reflect on it afterward, maybe even 30 minutes, and just jot down notes of what's good, what's great, what's terrible, and so that you can refer to those later as you're writing lesson plans and editing them in the future. So that's for classes that you're teaching now and you may teach again. Make sure you're taking those notes because you'll think you will remember, but you won't. So those notes are really helpful. Okay, Nancy asked about curriculum writing. Where do I even get started? So again, I'm going to do a whole series on this, but I will link in the show notes a blog post I have on this called Curriculum Design 101. But essentially, I start with analyzing the standards always. Then I work on notes and the instructional resources. I do those simultaneously. So I'm writing notes while I'm coming up with the instructional resources that'll go alongside. I'm going back and forth between those. Then I work on the assessments. And then this is so important. I circle all the way back to the beginning. And I walk through almost the entire process again now that I have the assessment. And I'm just constantly referring back to making sure, does this align to the standards? Do the notes align to the standards and the assessment? Do the activities align to the standards, the notes, and the assessments? And I'm just circling back over and over again until I feel like it all aligns. But again, I'll link a blog post in the show notes to get you started with that too. Allison asked, so speaking of starting with the standards, how do you break down a standard into meaningful learning targets and then into labs and lessons and activities? So how do you do that? So I have an entire unit on this in the Secondary Science Simplified professional development course, which again, I'll link the waitlist in the show notes. But it takes time. Like I spent nearly 2 months doing this for my chemistry course that I'm currently writing. But I was also doing this times 50 because I was doing it for 50 states, which hopefully you're only having to read the standards for one state. So it won't take you as long. But I read the standards and I've just had a lot of practice doing this. I also look at textbooks too and see a lot of textbooks at the start of each chapter have a list of learning objectives. And that kind of helps give you some more practical objectives that will go along with standards. That'll be helpful too. But it just takes a lot of practice. And again, I'll get into this more too when we do our podcast series on curriculum writing. But I would just say practice makes perfect, and try to write your learning targets like a test question, like an open response test question. I feel like that makes your learning target really specific and practical when it could be a test question. Okay, Helen asked how to come up with interesting inquiry activities when writing a curriculum. And I will just say it takes time and it takes a lot of trial and error. And then the other thing I will say is think of when you're looking at a unit, what's a topic that's often hard or considered boring? I think those are the best topics to bring in inquiry activities for to engage your students, the boring and the hard topics. So I would start with that. I would get ideas from other people of what they've done. And I would look up maybe more traditional activities and labs and ideas and think, how can I tweak this and make this more inquiry based so I can use it that way? And then over time, the more you teach something, the more these ideas will just naturally come to you. Again, I've had like a lot of practice doing this because I've been writing curriculum now for 6 years. So maybe it's been 7 years, but they come more naturally. The ideas do to me now, but that's where I would just say, just start small and really trial and error and start with the boring and hard topics first. Okay, Cassidy asked tips for using It's Not Rocket Science curriculum when you're going into a maternity leave. So first, congrats. I want to encourage you that baby is number one, most important. So don't worry about your class at all. And two, if you can line up a sub, the sooner you can line them up, the better, because then you can answer any questions they have in advance, but that may not be something you're able to do. So if you're not able to do it, you can only do what you can do. So get a sub as soon as you can. Now, she specifically already has my curriculum. And so I will say I wrote my curriculum with enough detail that my own long-term maternity leave subs could use it. So it's written with enough that they should be able to be handed the unit and go from there. I would make sure that they watch the lecture videos that are linked in the Read First document and that they read the Read First document next to the unit plan so they can get acquainted with it. I would also recommend if they are not a science person that they flip the classroom. So you have the students watch the lecture videos that I've recorded at home and take their notes. You can use the filled in notes or the fill in the blank notes as well that are included instead of just the open-ended outlines if you want to make sure that they're really getting the content down on the paper that they really need. And then leave the class time for practice, for labs, etc. I try to write labs that don't require a ton of materials. Also, I would check out that distance learning tips PDF that's in the implementation folder, because that's where I provide tips for if you're in a virtual learning setting. And even though a maternity leave sub would be in person with students, the virtual learning tips are kind of helping the content be really independent for students. And so that can be helpful when you have a sub that's not a science person and doesn't know how to set up a lab. I would also see too, if you're going to be gone for 3 months, maybe there's just 3 labs you can narrow in and have them do, and see if anyone in your science department would be willing on those 3 lab days to set them up for your sub. I would also tell your sub to not grade a lot for accuracy, like really just grade stuff for completion. And then I would also encourage having some sort of project or even a formal lab report for every unit while you're out. That would be worth the same as a test. So that way, if the sub just did a terrible job, at least you can have that project or that lab report to average out with their test grade, or even replace the test grade if it was really bad. And so that would be my best advice for that. And then I would not worry about it. Like, you're not getting paid to do this, and this is your only time with your newborn baby. You're not going to have enough brain cells to be caring about this and caring about your newborn. So just let it go. And then when you get back, I would just start from scratch with teaching procedures, teaching how you want to run your class and everything else. And then just go in knowing like the first 1 to 5 days that you're there, you're just going to be like reading the temperature of the room and figuring out like what the heck they know and don't know. And then just pick up where they left off. If you need to reteach a bunch of stuff, you need to reteach a bunch of stuff. If you don't get through as much content this year, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Even if you have an EOC, it's not the end of the world. And Cassidy was asking, she has a July baby. So her maternity leave is going to go into the start of the year. I actually think that's kind of one of the nicest ways to do it, because it's kind of like, I mean, not that you can really plan these things, but then just let it be what it's going to be. And then just choose when you come back in October and November, that's day 1. Like, that's when you're going to really, really start with your students. And then same goes on the other end. Like, my maternity leave started in March. And so it was like, we did what we could the first, 3/4 of the year. And the last quarter of the year was just kind of like YOLO. And then basically I came in at the end of the year and I looked at all the final grades, and I saw some kids that had bombed their 4th quarter, but had been fine for me. And my admin kind of gave me permission to kind of curve some of their grades so that like they weren't bombing the entire year because of 1 quarter with a sub that didn't know any science. So that'd be something to consider too. Okay. Oh, and I'll say to this, if you don't use my curriculum, I have a whole blog post just with maternity leave prep tips. So that would be helpful whether you use It's Not Rocket Science resources or not. And so I'll link that in the show notes as well. Okay. One more school question and then a couple fun ones to wrap this up. Taylor asked, what do you do when the tests you have to give as a PLC, so professional learning community, are difficult and wordy? So she was saying, my class averages are about a C on them, and it takes the fun out of science preparing them for such specific questions on a test. I'm frustrated to teach to a test that I don't control. Okay, so the first thing I would say is, if you're in a PLC where you're required to do common tests, then you need to be meeting as a PLC to review the data from those tests. Okay, so I have taught in a school where we had department-wide tests, and because of that, we wrote the test as a department. We made edits to them every year as a department, and then we sat down after every test and we had lunch after every test and we looked at our class averages. And if everyone in your department is getting similar averages, then you all need to consider rewriting the test. Like, if everyone got a 65% average on this test, like maybe that could be a little bit higher. This test isn't a great test. Let's figure out what we can do for this. Now, if other people are getting better test averages, I would ask them what they are doing differently from you instructionally, and see what they're doing and seeing if you can learn from them. But if you find out that they're just like giving their students the test as a study guide in advance and they're not really teaching them, I would bring that to your admin and say, this isn't an authentic assessment. Like, what can we do about this? And see what they're willing to do with you there. If no one is willing to make changes in your PLC and or your admin's not supporting you on this, then I would personally create alternative summative assessments to help balance out those test grades in the grade book. So I would be having some sort of project or, a formal lab report or just something like that I could go into the grade book for each unit test to help balance out some of those grades. And then the last thing I'll say, Taylor, is I'm going to be honest. I don't think C averages are bad on a test. I know for me personally, like I shot for a 75% average on my test because that is an average grade and it should be an average. Like there are going to be students that are lower than that and above. And if I had averages that were higher than that, great. I didn't like try to make it harder. If I really use that, if I had averages lower than that, okay, what sort of reinforcement do I need to do? But I personally felt comfortable with the 75% average on my tests. And so I want to give you that freedom as well. Okay, we have a few fun ones to wrap us up. This is getting long, but y'all had so many great questions. Okay, someone asked some of my favorite Instagram follows. So these will be people I follow just on my personal life that I just enjoy. And I'll link all these in the show notes. One is Kate from Naptime Kitchen. She is a good friend in real life of my real life best friend and neighbor, and then also my sister-in-law. And I just really enjoy her as a person. I've been following Kate since she was just like a normal person. And now she has, 100,000 plus followers. I just enjoy her and I enjoy how she lives her life and helps her family. And she has really good practical advice for me as a mom. So I love following her. I love Susie from Busy Toddler. Susie has given me so much permission as a parent in terms of helping me raise preschool and toddler age children. I just enjoy her so much. I've had so much practical advice from her, so much permission to do things differently than I would have thought I should do them as a mom. And I just really enjoy Susie. And then the last two people I've loved following, these are two recent follows I've just discovered. And I just like them as people. That's all I can say. You may follow them and not like them as people. And so you may not want to follow them anymore. But one is the car mom. I just really enjoy her as a person. I don't know anything about cars. I love my minivan and I'm going to have it and drive it. I've had it for years and I'm going to drive it until the wheels fall off. So it's not like I follow her because I'm looking for car advice, but I still like listening to her talk about cars. I don't know how else to explain it. I just like her a lot. And she also has kids similar ages to mine and she has boy, girl, boy. So I just feel like we connect in that. And then also similarly is Kaylin Sheik. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She is the owner of Sweetwater Floral, which is just like a floral business in Michigan. Like we have no connection to each other whatsoever, but I found her on the internet because she is a cool summer like me. I've gotten one of those color consults before from Created Colorful, who I'll also link because I love Lindsay from Created Colorful. But I found Kaylin because she is the same color palette as me. So she got reposted on this Created Colorful Instagram. And I started following her and she is just so funny. Again, she has 3 kids. Just like me, similar ages, similar spacing of those children. Her husband is a hunter-gatherer, like my husband. So she has a lot of funny things she talks about when her husband goes hunting, which I feel like I can relate to. They're building a house. We're about to start building a house. I just really relate to her. And she does these coffee chats every morning. She calls them coffee clinks. And so every morning that I'm feeding my baby a bottle and she's feeding her baby a bottle, she's on her coffee clinks and I'm watching them. And I just enjoy her and I laugh out loud. So she's one of my favorite Instagram follows too. Okay, someone asked just something I love about my husband, and I thought to make this an even more fun question. One of my favorite icebreaker questions is what's something you love to hate or hate to love? So it's something that kind of drives you crazy, but it's also super endearing. So you have grown to love it about them, or you don't want to love this about them, but you just do because they're your person. And what I will say about my husband is he is the most considerate human being in the middle of the night. I don't know how else to explain it other than when I'm pregnant and when I'm waking up 4 times a night to go to the bathroom, he will always wake up and be like, "Are you okay? Everything good? Do you need anything?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." I'm the type of person who I have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. So if I wake up to go to the bathroom, I'm keeping my eyes closed and I'm shuffling to the toilet. I'm stay asleep, stay tired. Don't think anything that's going to get your mind racing. Stay calm. Get your pee out and then get back in bed, go right back to sleep, start counting sheep. And he's trying to have this sweet conversation in the middle of the night. And it's something we laugh so much about now, but he really is so considerate. And what's funny is we are good friends with still some of our college friends. And his college roommate said he was the exact same in college. If he would get in late from studying, Thomas would wake up and be like, "Hey man, you good? Everything good?" And I'm like, "I'm good. Don't talk to me. I don't want to talk. I don't want to have a conversation." So I love to hate to love that about my husband, how considerate he is in the middle of the night. It's very sweet, but also don't talk to me because I need to stay asleep. Okay, two more funny questions that were asked, and we'll wrap this up. One was a weird food combo that I enjoy. And I thought about it, and I really don't think there's anything weird that I enjoy. I will say I do think pineapple on pizza is good. I'm not going to go for like a pineapple pizza. It's not my first choice, but I do like that. And I know a lot of people feel very passionately against that. But I don't think I like anything that's weird. But one thing I will say is like my absolute favorite food of all time is tailgate food or sporting arena food. And so what I mean by that is like for tailgate food, I mean like heavy apps. Like I live for an event that's feeding people with heavy apps. I love a good pigs in a blanket. Okay. And then with sporting arena food, I mean, I love hot dogs, nachos, popcorn with extra butter. I just want a helmet full of Dippin' Dots. Okay. I would love to go to a Braves game and eat a helmet full of Dippin' Dots. So that's the kind of food, that's my favorite type of food, which I do think it's not a weird combo. I think all those things go together very well, but I do think it's weird that like if I was to describe my favorite food, that would be it. I love going to live sporting events. I'll go sit at a hockey game. I don't care. We live in South Carolina. We barely have hockey, but I'll go to a hockey game because I love a good plate of nachos, loaded nachos. So that's my weird food, I guess I would say I love. And then last but not least was most regrettable fashion phase or statement. And so I kind of have two for this that I really regret, and they defined all the pictures I was in high school. So first, I like to say that I listened to way too much Blink-182, Secondhand Serenade, and Paramore in my formative years. And so I had a very intense phase where I wore a lot of black eyeliner, and then I would wear low-rise flare jeans, and I had red Converse All-Stars or Chuck Taylors, some of us refer to them as. And then I always had like a fitted shirt with like a very long cami tank top underneath it. That was like my uniform in high school, and I regret that. And then the other thing I regret is from 8th through 12th grade, I had one Hollister shirt. And this was in the era of time where it was very cool to wear shirts that were branded, that like said Hollister all across them. And so I had this one Hollister shirt. I will never forget it. It is like iconic in my brain. It was brown with hot pink font and hot pink rhinestones on it. And it said Hollister across it. And I swear, y'all, I wore that once a week, 8th grade through high school, because I loved it so much. And I have serious regrets there. So that's my most regrettable fashion statement. Oh, we did it in under an hour, barely. I had so much fun answering these questions. And I just want to say too, just don't ever hesitate to reach out to me with questions that you have. I love using your questions all the time as inspiration for podcast episodes. So please don't be shy. And if y'all enjoyed this episode, let me know and we'll do this again. Like if you like these Ask Me Anything type episodes, I would love to do it again because I want these episodes to be what you want. So DM me, email me, let me know if you enjoyed this episode. I would love to know. And as always, thanks for listening. I think this might be our longest episode yet. It's definitely my longest solo episode I've ever done. So thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, you can find any links that I mentioned in the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 50. And don't forget to shop the Cyber Monday and Tuesday sales today in my TBT store and my resource shop. You can save 25%. There is a code. If you go to my TBT store, you'll see a banner across the top of the page that'll have the code. And it's the same code there as it is in my resource shop. And you'll just enter it at checkout. I hope this helps. And I hope y'all have a great rest of your week. Thanks for tuning in. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.